The news from ITN.
Mrs. Thatcher arrives at the scene of the FA Cup disaster. Tributes for the 93 dead. The hospitals say the toll could be higher. Liverpool fans mourn at Anfield. 71 still in hospital, 17 in intensive care. And the questions: what could have been done to avert the tragedy? Good afternoon. Police say the death toll in the FA Cup disaster at Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield stands at 93, but hospital officials say it could be as high as 108. Mrs. Thatcher arrived in Sheffield a short time ago to see for herself the scene of Europe's worst ever sporting disaster. The soccer fans, mainly young people and children, died when the crowd surged forward at the start of yesterday's semi-final match between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest. Most of the victims came from Liverpool. Special prayers have been said there and in Sheffield. As an inquiry is set up to find out what went wrong, there's mounting criticism of the police, who allowed Liverpool fans without tickets to surge onto the terraces packed with ticket holders. The chief executive of Liverpool Football Club has called for this year's FA Cup competition to be abandoned as a mark of respect to the victims. 71 fans are still in hospital and 17 of them are in intensive care.
The morning after the day British football will never forget, and Hillsborough became a memorial ground to those who died. As soon as day broke, floral and other tributes arrived almost by the minute. Locals of all ages came to pay their respects. The flowers arranged against the gates at the end of the ground where the Liverpool fans died. Others didn't bring flowers, they just stood and reflected on how a football match had become a national tragedy. Some were inconsolable in their grief. Earlier, at a makeshift mortuary at a gymnasium next to the ground, relatives identified loved ones and churchmen offered what help they could.
Comforting the bereaved. Aiding by being there with them, whether it's holding a hand, arm around his shoulder, looking after them, knowing that it's the worst part of their life, losing somebody they love, losing somebody who's close to them. It's not just tonight. It will be counselling, it will be social work, it will be spiritual guidance.
In the ground this morning, under flags at half-mast, work began clearing the terracing that became a death trap for so many, advertising boards that had been used as stretchers, the damaged fencing that so tragically had proved a barrier to survival for fans desperate to escape. Police and health and safety experts are beginning the task of finding out exactly how it happened. The sickening scenes here yesterday raised crucial questions about policing, crowd control, and indeed safety in soccer stadiums around the country. But in Sheffield today, there's simply disbelief that such a tragedy could occur and that such a great footballing city as Liverpool should suffer such an appalling cost. In the last half hour, Mrs. Thatcher flew into Hillsborough from Chequers and went straight to the ground to inspect the scene. She was met by club officials. With her, the Home Secretary, Mr. Douglas Hurd, whose department has overall responsibility for safety at sports grounds. Mrs. Thatcher was taken immediately to the Lepping Lane end of the ground, to the terracing where the fans died. There, she paid specific attention to the fencing against which many were crushed to death. Mark Austin, ITN, Sheffield.
70 Liverpool supporters are still being treated in 2 Sheffield hospitals. Most of them have chest and stomach injuries. They'd been trampled and crushed against a fence as hundreds of fans surged forward. This morning they awoke to the memory of yesterday's nightmare.
I've been so scared in my life, I tell you. Never been so scared. I've seen a few things, but that was frightening. That was bad.
Could you help yourself?
No chance. Couldn't do nothing. You'd have the mercy of anyone else, just like we all just got pushed right through to the front. Got pushed through the tunnel right to the bottom, and we just hit the crowds, and just everyone was just going everywhere. You were on the floor, and all you could do was get lifted up, and that was it. You couldn't move. That was it. Your head was like that, and but like everyone was just fighting to help. To get as many people injured over onto the pitch. Fantastic,
Some fans said when the crush started outside, they were allowed in without showing their tickets.
I went under the barrier, the police said get in that side entrance, and I walked in and I didn't even use my ticket, and I've still got it, and I bet you there's plenty that still have got the tickets unused.
When we was outside the ground, it was so packed. There was women in that there was fellas trying to get their wives out. It was absolutely unbelievable outside the ground. Everyone was so squashed, we wasn't moving or nothing. And I heard about him opening the gate and letting spectators in, and I think that was the best thing to do. There was going to be accidents outside if he hadn't done that, I think. Better thing to do that.
The tragedy united Nottingham and Liverpool supporters. They helped each other escape from the stand.
I got onto the pitch, had a bit of oxygen and that, and I seemed all right then. And about 5 minutes later, I curled over, I couldn't breathe and nothing. I was in a really bad way. A Nottingham Forest supporter come running over. And he just went berserk. He ran after, he got an ambulance, he brought everyone over to come and help me. Like, he stayed with me all the way through. He got me into the sports hall. He was like trying to get me, my hands were in spasms, and he was brilliant. He was trying to get me to open my hands and squeeze. And he was there saying, I'm a Notts Forest lad, I want you to pull through. He was really backing me up and everything. It was just brilliant.
When I got outside, I was lying on the floor, and there was some fella lying on the floor next to me shaking, and he asked me, could I hold his head? And I was holding his head. The doctors were running backward and forward to him, shouting, get him an ambulance. And in the meantime, he said to me, he just looked at me and said, help me, and he died in my arms.
18 supporters remain in intensive care. Some are critically injured.
The principal injury that we've seen in the intensive care unit was mainly due to suffocation. Patients obviously under a large pile of bodies unable to breathe, and they obviously couldn't breathe for some time, and that's been the major problem in these patients when they came into us.
A few of the casualties were in their early teens. The lucky ones were able to walk away this morning.
Just got crushed and I passed out.
What did the doctor say?
Just keep me in for observation.
How old are you?
40 today.
You think you'll ever go back to another football match?
Yeah.
14 today?
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
24 hours after the disaster that claimed so many lives, there are 3 questions that the police and the football authorities will have to answer. Firstly, why were Liverpool given 4,000 fewer tickets for their fans than Nottingham Forest, despite having more supporters? Secondly, why was a gate opened, allowing the fans outside the ground, many without tickets, to pour in? And thirdly, why were those fans allowed to head straight for the area behind the goal, instead of being channelled towards the corners of the ground, where there was more room? Just before the match started, police opened up the Leppings Lane entrance, letting up to 4,000 Liverpool fans into the ground. They did not go into the covered stand, but surged onto the terraces, all heading for the central area behind the goal. Crash barriers stopped them escaping to the sides, where there was more room, and the 10-foot-high perimeter fence prevented them from spilling onto the pitch, though some did scramble through a small gate. Others were dragged to safety by spectators in the stand. The Liverpool fans were allowed in through this gate once the game had begun. In their frustration to get in, they'd been kicking this fencing next to the gate. The Sheffield Wednesday club has been explaining why Liverpool fans were allocated tickets in the smaller end of the ground.
It was agreed that Nottingham Forest would have the Cop end purely because of the traffic flow of getting their supporters in from the M1, directed them into the Cop end, whereas the Liverpool supporters were basically directed along the M62 and down, which obviously took the Leppings Lane West Stand end.
Ironically, it was the fences designed to keep hooligans from invading the pitch that blocked the avenue of escape from the crush. Such fences aren't compulsory, they're erected on the advice of the local police. There will now be a campaign to have them removed.
If you're in the ground yourself, you know, in a crowd, you can disperse yourself, you can move sideways, but you can't under the modern system. You're penned in. So you can't move sideways as you could in the olden days, and you can't get onto the pitch because of the barriers in front. Now, the barriers have got to come down. I mean, if there had been barriers up at the Bradford fire, 3 times as many more would have burned. They wouldn't have been able to run away.
At a press conference this morning, South Yorkshire Police deflected criticism of the way they'd failed to funnel the crowd safely.
Look, we can understand people criticising any aspect And every aspect where a major tragedy happens, in due course of time, we'll find a balanced view of where those criticisms should be directed.
8 years ago, Hillsborough was the scene of a similar incident during a game between Spurs and Wolves. It happened at the same end of the ground. People were crushed by the late arrival of fans at Leppings Lane. No one died then, but there was the same criticism of the police. Insurance assessors and health and safety executive inspectors have been arriving at Hillsborough all day. They'll be advised by Sheffield Wednesday's own safety consultant.
Are you able to just tell me what you're going to actually be doing this morning?
No, I'd better not. Haven't even got authority from the police to do it yet.
Their job now will be to try to piece together the events of football's darkest day. Glenn O'Glaser, ITN, Sheffield.
There are 2 emergency numbers for inquiries. The first one is 0742 570 800. That's 0742 570 800. And the second is a Liverpool number, 051 708 7277. That's 051 708 7277. Liverpool is today a city united by grief as it mourns its dead. Survivors have been reliving the horror of fans trampling each other to save their lives. A team of clergymen are running a 24-hour counselling service. One told how a mother went to hospital to see her husband in intensive care, not knowing her son had been killed.
Home ground, Anfield. People arrived through the night to add to the growing pile of tributes at this impromptu shrine. Fans reputed for their toughness wept openly. Some had just come from Hillsborough. Many had lost friends and family. At dawn, Liverpool and Everton scarves fluttered in the breeze on the gates built as a memorial to the former Liverpool manager, Bill Shankly. For a city which lives and breathes soccer, the fans are still reeling from yesterday's death toll. For though Liverpool fans have been inextricably linked with rowdy behaviour since Heysel, here at Anfield, 40,000 regularly attend each Saturday's game. There are no barriers and little crowd trouble. In the shadow of Anfield, youngsters stood for a minute's silence. Nearly everyone on this pitch has a friend or relative who attended the match. They all came back safely, but some, as young as these, did not. They were remembered at services throughout the city. Catholics and Protestants joined together in their prayers.
Let us pray for all those who lost their lives in yesterday's football tragedy, and for their families and friends. We also pray for all those who were injured in body or in mind by their horrendous experience. And remember with thankfulness all who came to their help in their hour of need. Lord, in your mercy.
For centuries, Liverpool people have brought their joys and sorrows to this parish church by the river. And so it's quite natural that they should gather this morning to do that.
More memorial services to those who died will be held later today as the city comes to terms with its loss. Mark Webster, ITN, Liverpool.
The chairman of Liverpool Supporters Association started his day still unable to take in the enormity of the disaster. He had been there at the ground, like so many others, powerless to help the crushed and dying supporters. Ironically, the Supporters Association, with 8,000 members, was set up after the Heysel Stadium disaster 4 years ago.
I mean, once you see those, corpses rolling on the pitch again, and the purple faces, it's like reliving a nightmare.
Inevitably, part of the morning was taken up by media interviews. A local radio phone-in where supporters, still in shock, felt they had to speak to someone.
There was people dead. Under my feet. I just couldn't get out. 6 foot for 20 minutes. Just couldn't get out. I could near touch the gate, but just couldn't get out. There was a dead lad in front of us. We had to hold him, and he just had to let him go. Really terrible. Oh, God. But you just couldn't get out.
Others recounted yesterday's seemingly timeless wait for loved ones at the city's Lime Street railway station. Mr. Taylor now has the job of trying to offer support for bereaved and shocked members.
I never thought I'd see anything like that on a football pitch again. It's going to take me a long time and a lot of hard work that I hope I'll be able to put in to help the football supporters and their friends and relatives in the city to deal with this crisis.
This 19-year-old passed out in the crush to wake up beside dead people. He says he had to write down his thoughts in an effort to get it out of his system.
There was a little lad I'd passed out, and I woke up and the woman said,
can you do us a favour, love, to get here, like, can you turn on your side? And as I turned on my side, there was a lad there. He mustn't have been about between 7 or 8, and he was dead.
One of so many horrific recollections, indelible on so many minds today. Andrew Simmons, ITN, Liverpool.
They have been arriving at Anfield all morning, the Liverpool faithful paying tribute to their dead. The gates, built in memory of Liverpool's greatest manager, Bill Shankly, now serve as a memorial in a way no one ever planned. They leave flowers, scarves, soccer souvenirs of all kinds. Supporters of all ages are here, a vivid reminder that yesterday's disaster killed so many so young. Everton fans too have made the pilgrimage, leaving messages that reflect their thoughts the morning after tragedy struck. Many of those here were at Hillsborough yesterday, their memories still clear.
Like, you were getting crushed yourself. Like, I was elbowing, like little lads that big, elbowing him in the face, but I got smacked, a few times myself. But there was no trouble there or nothing, it was just pushing and shoving. Just wanted to go and see Liverpool.
Some say the FA Cup should now be scrapped, others disagree.
Let them go on and let Liverpool and Everton get down to the final and give it to the people that's lost their poor kids and everything. Let it go on and give it to the people down there, man. Give it to the Liverpool people.
Doctors who attended the match have claimed that emergency medical facilities at Hillsborough were woefully inadequate and that there was no organised response to the disaster. Well, joining me live from Liverpool is Dr. John Ashton, Professor of Medicine at Liverpool University, who was at the game. Dr. Ashton, what were the medical facilities like?
Well, in the Leppings Lane end, where I was and where I became involved, there was very little. It didn't look to me as though there was much on the pitch either, actually. It looked to me as though the St John's was thin on the ground. The Liverpool supporters themselves were doing a lot of the first aid and resuscitation. I mean, the St John's were doing what they could, but, from where I was in the stand initially, I could see, that there wasn't very much. They didn't have any stretchers. They had very few stretchers. They were using boards. I had to set up basically a kind of clearing station behind the Leppings Lane stand. There were between 10 and 20 dead there, and a lot of unconscious and seriously injured people. There was nobody took charge, no senior police officer took charge. There were very few St John's, there was 1 or 2 ambulances. There was no order, nobody knew what to do. There should have been a disaster plan in operation. I didn't see any evidence of it.
What about the actual equipment? Was there any?
Well, there was nothing at our end. I mean, what I had to do was basically to quickly go around and assess all the casualties, about 30 or 40 of them, and prioritise them for dispatch to hospital, whether they were dead and it was too late, or which were the ones to go first and which could hang on, because at that stage the police were actually dispatching them not in order of severity of illness, of injury, but in terms of just who came first, and that's not the right thing to do. I mean, I had to quickly prioritise them and dispatch them off in that kind of order. There was no real help available on the ground. A lot of the public came in, and people who knew how to do resuscitation were trying, and the coppers, the ordinary coppers, were doing their best, but there was a lack of leadership.
Briefly, what's your opinion of the fencing at the ground?
Well, it is a death trap. I mean, with a football match, you've got 4 elements. You've got the ground itself, which is inadequate. You've got the spectators, who are by and large very well behaved, and I mean, I'm concerned about
Can I just
and then
interrupt
you've
you?
got the policing, which was totally inadequate, and then you've got the emergency response, which was inadequate. And the responsibility for this has got to be laid at the door of people who are in charge of the organisation of the FA, the police, the emergency plan for Sheffield, and the Minister for Sport.
Dr. Ashton, thank you very much indeed. Well, after the tragedy, what now for this year's FA Cup competition? We'll be speaking to the man in charge of the Football Association. That's in a couple of minutes. It's just been announced that Liverpool Football Club is suspending all its games for the time being. The club is also giving £100,000 to the relief fund, plus yesterday's gate receipts. Simon Marks is at Anfield now.
So, a short time ago, a press conference ended here at Anfield, very sombre board of directors having met for 2.5 hours. John Smith, the chairman of the club, announced that a disaster fund is being set up, the Liverpool FC Relief Fund it's to be called. As well as the £100,000 donation from Liverpool, the club is giving all the monies that it would have received from yesterday's game at Hillsborough. Mr. Smith also announced a suspension of all future Liverpool matches. He placed no time limit on that suspension, and he has not taken any further questions. All the board of directors, players and officials here very, very upset at yesterday's events. Hundreds of fans are still gathering here at the Shankly gates. Many of them have now been allowed onto the pitch, and the Kop end of the ground is now smothered with flowers, scarves, other items of memorabilia. The sense of tragedy here, very real indeed. Simon Marks, ITN Live at Anfield.
Well, with me now is the Chief Executive of the Football Association, Mr. Graham Kelly. Graham, clearly safety measures were faulty. Is your conscience clear that enough has been done since Heysel and Bradford on safety?
Well, as far as I'm aware, my conscience is clear. I've been searching it for the last 24 hours virtually, and I know that we made the decision to stage the match there. We took account of what happened last year. We took account of all the money that clubs have spent on making grounds safe. An enormous amount has been done since the safety of sports grounds was brought in. The club had a safety certificate. It was one of the most advanced in terms of crowd control. And it's easy to have hindsight, but based on what we knew up till yesterday, our consciences are clear.
Well, is it time then for perhaps a complete overhaul of safety measures?
Well, I certainly think that the filtering outside the ground seems to have been the start of the problem, so there's an obvious starter there as to how people approach grounds. A lot of that is outside the control of football clubs because their fences, their external fences abut the main highway, so there are a lot of detailed considerations to be made there. We've got to reconsider perimeter fencing. Obviously, we're in the hands of the safety experts and the local authorities who commission those experts, but that's an obvious one for reconsideration. I think in view of the enormity of what happened yesterday, the fans' traditional preference for standing up, which so many of them express, I think we've got to move them away from that and put more and more seats into our best grounds, into our top grounds, because I don't know that a situation such as that will be acceptable in the future.
Now, what checks does the FA normally make for a tie?
Well, normally we have the fullest consultation with the host club. Before the match went to Sheffield Wednesday a year ago, we went for a meeting with the club and the police. We were assured that the same arrangements or similar arrangements were in place for this year, and so we were happy that everything that needed to be done was being done in the build-up to yesterday's match.
Now let's talk about ticket allocation, because there's clearly a problem with that. Who decides how tickets are allocated for a match?
Well, basically, we're in the hands of the police. We make the decision...
Who decided that, sorry to interrupt you, but who decided that Liverpool, who had by far the larger majority of fans, should have a smaller allocation of tickets?
That is based on the recommendation of the police, because they have the regard to traffic flow. The Liverpool people come from one direction, the Nottingham Forest people come from another, so it's their recommendation that the tickets are allocated in the way they are. And we had another situation to take account of yesterday. We had another match taking place at Villa Park. Trouble occurs on motorways sometimes between football fans or alleged football fans. Yesterday we kept them apart. They did not meet at any point, and that is another consideration, an overall consideration.
Now, Liverpool's chief executive has been calling for this year's competition to be cancelled. Will it be?
I said yesterday that no thought would be given to the football considerations over the weekend, and I stick to that. I think it's much too soon to make decisions of that nature. My feeling, and it's only a feeling, is that it would not be right to cancel the competition, that in some form or another a tribute must be paid to those people who died yesterday, and we must link that tribute to football, to the FA Cup final, but that decision will be made not today.
Graham Kelly, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Clearly the debate must continue for a long time. Now the rest of the day's news. West Midlands Police have launched a murder inquiry after a plainclothes officer was killed while keeping watch on an illegal drinks party. Constable Anthony Salt collapsed in the street in the Small Heath district of Birmingham after leaving a colleague for what police called operational reasons. Detectives are questioning about 80 people and carrying out house-to-house inquiries. Now back to Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield, where a short time ago, Mrs Thatcher spoke to reporters.
And we know the many, many families who just feel a great emptiness today. Those people for whom they had lived are no longer with them. And that's why the Home Secretary and I felt we had to come, first to get a much better impression of what the problem was, and secondly to show, the only way we could, how very deeply we feel for those who are just bereft. I think that there are two things the Home Secretary and I have to say. First, there will of course be a public inquiry. It is a disaster of enormous proportions, coming on the top of previous disasters, coming on the top of many precautions which have already been taken, but which clearly have not been enough. So there will be a major public inquiry, and the Home Secretary will make a statement tomorrow.
Well, we'll be back with a news update at 10 to 6 and extended bulletins at 7 o'clock and 8:45. But for the moment, good afternoon.